here you have the object of
interest.
Joe's.
That's cool.
Richie, I put that on my slide in my presentation. I
saw. I saw. That was nice. Yeah, no. So I hope everyone is living in a location where I can easily ship stuff to.
Cool. Well, I guess we can go ahead and get started here. It's a couple minutes after. I think we could start. I wanted to start by just kind of introducing ourselves on the Grafana side. This is the first Tempo community call, which is kind of cool. And I thought we'd introduce ourselves, and then anyone else who feels comfortable introducing themselves, feel free to jump in. But feel free to lurk also if you're not in the mood to talk. So I'm Joe. I'm one of the maintainers of Tempo, and I've been working on it for a bit now. Was very happy to finally open source it. Very also happy to see all the response. I see a couple of people in this chat that have already submitted some PRs, been involved in the issues and in the Slack, and it's been the response has been really cool. And I'm excited to hear kind of how you all are using it and what's going on in the community. Ananya, you want to go ahead?
Thanks, Joe. Yeah, I can go next. So I've been working with tracing for a while now. Was probably like in 2018, I submitted my first PR to the Jaeger project. And yeah, after that, a friend of mine at Grafana, Gautam, if you've heard of him, just said, hey, if you want to work on tracing full-time, might as well just join the company. And that's what I did. And I continue to work on tracing at Grafana. I'm one of the co-maintainers with Joe. And yeah, really looking forward to how folks are using it and sort of how we can help with all of these integrations, scaling out issues, fun problems to work on. Anyone want to go next and introduce?
Yeah. Oh yeah, it's a lot of people.
Yeah, I just retweeted it. So just to break the ice, I'll continue. But then everyone else is also more than welcome to say something. I'm Richie, also working at Grafana Labs on the community side, and with my Prometheus/Open Metrics hat on, I've wanted what is now Tempo since 2016. So I'm totally thrilled that we finally have that last missing piece. Course, like since 15, I wanted to have what is now Loki. Since 16, I wanted to have what is now Tempo, and everything's great and awesome, and the future is ours. Next one.
Yeah, I might as well just do a quick introduction as a non-Grafana. So I joined Slack and been kind of lurking, but also writing a bit since the introduction of Tempo, basically because I was handed the task to introduce distributed tracing. And I already bought into the Grafana ecosystem with Loki and Cortex and so on. So it feels nice to have everything in one package. So I'm mostly here to just listen in and see what the roadmap is and how we can help as well if needed.
Very cool.
I'm Jita. I'm the documentation writer for the Tempo product, working at Grafana Labs.
Jita, thank you.
Yeah, we still have yet to meet, Jita. I think we have something scheduled for Monday.
So yeah, hi. I'm not working as a software engineer, and I'm a computer science student. And I have been contributing some things to Tempo during the last 2 weeks. I'm pretty interested in observability, and I will join as a site reliability engineer Cassis.io. They work on load testing in January. So yeah, I'm liking a lot Tempo and having fun.
Cool. I think I think yesterday released 030, and I'm pretty sure Daniel wrote about 80% of the PRs for that release. So thank you very much. It was an excellent contribution for that.
I can go next. I'm Cesar. I work for Workday, and I recently, pretty much as Simon, I was tasked with a distributed tracing task, and end up being like not a piece with Jaeger and whatnot. And I thought like Tempo would, as an appetite for being integrated with the other tools for logs and the visualization of it. So I joined the project, and yeah, I'm enjoying so far.
Cool.
It's brilliant. Nice.
All right. Oh, sorry. Joachim?
Yeah,
Go
I
ahead.
can go. I'm Joachim Marlin from Sweden. I work with Simon at Embark Studios. I've used Grafana products before. I've used Jaeger for distributed tracing, and then we discovered Tempo just as we were starting to implement distributed tracing for our team. So that was great timing, and yeah, working on that for the last couple of weeks. So I'm really excited to continue.
Very cool.
Nice. Are you already using Jaeger, or you were looking
No.
to start using it?
Yeah.
Okay.
So we're
great.
going to use Tempo. We initially looked at
Perfect.
Jaeger, and I've used Jaeger before in other companies.
Okay. Great. Okay.
Very cool. Cool. Well, I'm going to move ahead a little bit, but certainly I kind of want this to be conversational. Feel free to jump in whenever. And if, as we move forward, if you want to introduce yourself, certainly that's door's not closed. Anyone is welcome to do whatever. This is meant to be a little bit of office hours and a little bit of just community chatter. So certainly I want people to bring questions, thoughts, just reporting kind of what you're doing internally with Tempo, showing internal metrics or just discussion would be great. While you're thinking about that, I'm going to move ahead and just talk about what we're talking about for V1. So kind of the roadmap for V1, when we're hoping to release, and what we're hoping to get into it. And then after that, I'll open the floor. And if people have questions or thoughts or just want to chat about some issue they saw, in the repo, just feel free to ask. So I believe this is attached to the meeting, but I'm going to just go ahead and put it here in chat also. This is the doc, the community call doc. And Richie has kind of put this together for us. He's the community guy at Grafana. So to talk a little bit about V1, we're really hoping to have V1, I'd say towards the end of Q1 2021. That's our goal to kind of stamp it as, production ready, and we feel like feature-wise it's reached the point where we can say V1. We've been using it internally for months and months. So, of course, it was rough at first. Now it's very stable. And most of what we're looking to stamp out for V1 is a little cleanup, kind of solidifying config, making sure all our metric names are what we want, the kinds of things, we want to not change after we stamp V1. If you go to the repo and you look under the V1 tag, there's a number of issues there. So if you want to see a little bit through the repo, we try to keep those up to date. We need to kind of have more regular bug scrubs and such. But for the most part, if you go there, there's a V1 label and you'll see things that we're targeting for V1. I'd say primarily compression and kind of experimenting with compression, seeing how it plays a role for Tempo is high on the list. So right now we're just writing proto to S3 or GCS directly. And our storage costs are really only, I think, about 1/6 of our total TCO. So it's less about cost for us and more we're interested in seeing if it improves query performance for two reasons. One, we'll pull less from S3 per call, right? It'll have to just pull less. We'll spend more CPU decompressing and recompressing, right? But it will pull less data. So we're wondering if that's going to give us a little edge on query latency. And then secondly, we can build bigger blocks. So right now, it takes us a little over an hour to build blocks with 6 million traces in it, or 5 to 6 million. And that's about the largest blocks we build at Grafana. So if we were able to build larger blocks through compression, because we'd be reading and writing less data, take less time, then we could reduce the length of the block list, which would also improve query performance and allow longer retentions with better latency. So compression's big on our list for sure. A query front end, which Ananya is going to be poking around on probably for the rest of this year, is up on the list. Ananya, you want to talk about kind of your thoughts on the query front end, where you want to send that?
For sure. So the query front end is being worked on for a couple of reasons. We think that the search algorithm in Tempo can be improved a lot. Right now, the way it works is that we spin up a worker thread for each block that we store in our backend. And sometimes this puts a lot of load on our querier, because if we have like a few hundred blocks, and we fire a query. Each of the workers will fetch the Bloom filter for all of the blocks, and then check if the trace is in it, and so on. And there's like a lot of work. And what we really want to do is to sort of make sure that all of the workers are equally utilized. And a query frontend will help us do that, because when we get a query, the idea is to shard the block space and to sort of assign just a subset of it to each querier. And so it'll equally spread out the workload across all of them. And it'll also improve search times, we hope. And yeah, these are some of the reasons that we think a query frontend will be worth it.
Sure.
And what else? Let's see.
Talk about long-term traces that cross blocks.
Right. So we can do that right now with the querier, but the idea is that for traces that cross blocks, so for long-running traces, right, they can be part of multiple blocks. And right now, the way Tempo works is when we fire a query for a trace ID, it returns the first hit for the block that it finds the trace in. But this could just be a subset of the spans that make up the entire trace. And so we get some inconsistent results. And we don't want that. And so we want sort of like the ideal way would be to query all of the blocks, get all of the subsets that might be part of multiple blocks, and sort of stitch them together to make the full trace and then return it. And so for this, we kind of want exhaustive search across all of the blocks. And this will also, we looked at implementing context cancellations at first. So what we really wanted to do was, if we knew that a block has a trace and we hit it and we find a successful hit, then we just cancel all of the other workers because they're spending time unnecessarily querying other blocks, and then just return that subset of spans. We implemented context cancellations, but it turns out that there's some resource leak in the GCS client that we use. And what happens is it runs really smoothly for like 10 minutes, but after that, it just latency shoot up and it just doesn't work. And so we'll probably end up just really throwing that away, because we don't want to do context cancellations anymore. We want exhaustive search across all of the blocks. We want the querier to query all of the blocks, find all of the pieces, stitch it together, and return the trace. So, yep, that's another thing that the query frontend will help with.
So I think when we get this query front end together, there'll kind of always be this option to run it the way it is right now, which is, all your traces are sub 1 second or sub a few seconds. You don't care. You expect them all to end up in the same blocks, and that's fine. And you like the way it works now, and you want that. And then if you want to, the query front end is going to basically give you the option to add more resources to the query path. So it's going to basically shard a query across a whole lot of different queryers to search the entire block space in a reasonable amount of time, which is hard to do now. It's kind of the way Loki and Cortex have both scaled their query paths to handle, extremely large queries. If you saw some of the Loki 2.0 stuff, that the way they can do that is by breaking that query up into a bunch of tiny pieces and assigning them to different queries. So we're going to follow a similar path for a kind of exhaustive block search and to improve our query latencies.
And down the road, we can also add more features to the query frontend. We can do sharding by, say, tenant ID, or Cortex has this concept of shuffle sharding, where only a subset of queryers get assigned to query for a particular tenant. And don't know, this might be really useful for Tempo as well. So some of that experimentation might happen in the query frontend area.
Cool. Finally, two other things that we really want to get in for, again, query kind of latency, one of which Ananya's already handled, is Bloom filter sharding and also index paging. So when we build these 5 million trace blocks, our Bloom filter was 5 megs plus, which is a very large amount of data to pull from GCS to, unmarshal all that into some kind of object, and then to, check the Bloom filter to see if the trace exists in that block, or if we think the trace exists in that block. And it was eating up a lot of resources. It was also adding query latency. So sharding allowed us to reduce significantly the amount of data we were requesting from GCS, and the index paging will do something similar. We're going to only request pieces of the index at a time instead of the full thing. I think for our largest blocks, the index hits 1 megabyte plus. Again, that's just, when you think of like a megabyte file on your hard drive, that seems tiny, but pulling all that over the network, marshaling it into something and Go, that's a lot of memory management, and it adds to latency quite a bit. So we're hoping to kind of reduce the amount we're pulling from GCS or S3 in order to improve latencies through those two improvements. And then there's some other things, like I said. Feel free to check the V1 label in GitHub for other options or other things kind of we want for V1. Certainly, if any major bugs hit, we will also tag V1 on that. We want to make sure V1 feels stable for everyone and good. But let me open up the floor if there's any questions externally or internally or from whoever. Let's just kind of chat a bit, or it doesn't even have to be a question. If you want to just share some of your experience with Tempo or kind of what you're doing, that'd be cool too.
Before that, just one point of order. I realized I hadn't had the document on public editing. So now it's on public editing and everyone can help chip in with the note-taking if they so choose. And also they can, if they want, fill out their own names. But I already filled out everyone who's here. I don't know where you work. You can put it in, but you don't have to, like whatever. Either is fine. Yes, point of order over. The document is now fully editable. Usually it doesn't lead to abuse, and we'll just play it by ear, but we haven't had issues with this yet, so go ahead and go wild.
Cool. If you feel more comfortable just adding an agenda item, that works too.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And you can also, you should absolutely feel free also going forward, just add stuff to the agenda if you want to. If there's something you want to talk about, just toss it in. Also under the month or anything, this is a living, rolling document from the community for the community. So do whatever. Obviously don't abuse it, but outside of that, do whatever and feel free to shape what this call is about and how it's structured.
Are there any questions, thoughts?
So yeah, personally, I have a question. When I was working with the TempoDB backend, right? I saw code for memcached. What's the status of that code that works, or there are plans to add Redis and other storages, or yeah?
You're talking about the backend, the different backend implementations?
Yeah, the implementation for memcached. Yeah.
Okay, so we have GCS and S3 now. I think we want Azure blob storage, but I think we have an Azure. We do have an Azure account at Grafana. I don't plan it much. I've barely used Azure. So people in the community have asked if somebody has a lot of Azure experience and wants to implement that, that'd be awesome. I will link real fast here to the interfaces that need to be kind of implemented in order to pull that off. Let's see, TempoDB. So Ananya did the most recent one with S3. I did the original with GCS. Ananya added S3 support. Actually, I'm going to add this to the doc. I was going to put it in the chat, but the doc's the better place. So that's that backend Go file right there is the interface that if you the writer, reader, and compactor interfaces are what's necessary to implement in order to add support for a backend. And kind of our caching layers also implement those interfaces. So we have a memcache layer that implements those, and a lot of the calls are passed through because it's not going to do anything. It doesn't actually cache any of the actual proto, but it will cache the Bloom filters and the indexes. So the disk cache, which is okay, and the memcache, which is far better, you implement those interfaces also and kind of sit in between in like a chain.
Okay. Thanks.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's also probably like a good idea to probably open issue on GitHub asking for like multiple backend support, and then people can keep commenting on it and upvoting.
Yeah, actually, I was thinking about like catching with Redis instead of memcached, But yeah, maybe it's interesting to add something like that.
Sure.
Sure.
I am going to add an Azure backend ticket as soon as we're done with this call. I totally forgot about it. Gotham jumped in. He's like, I'd like to do that. Something tells me that will not show up for the next couple of months if we wait on Gotham. So I'll make an issue in the tempo repo so we can remember.
Either that or it's done already. We should check with him.
Or and he forgot about it, right?
I think we should just open like one meta issue saying additional backends support and then like add a list under that. Or we'll end up making multiple issues for the backends.
Sure. Let's see. We could, share some metrics. Those are always fun to look at. You guys want to see some wiggly lines in Grafana? let me pull up our stuff here.
Okay. Meanwhile, it looks like the drone YAML changed. We need to sign it again.
Oh crap! I did that.
The drone YAML needs to be signed every time. Changes.
Yeah. Somebody PR'd multiple architecture builds, right?
Whoa, that's cool.
It kind of works, but we need Jaeger to support it to fully support it. So they're working on the Jaeger repo now. And it broke our drone builds, so I had to make a small change. I forgot. You even told me that, and I forgot. Let's see. So right now in Grafana, we have 1.4 billion traces over a 2-week retention period. A window. Doink, this window. Yes. And this is kind of... So this is a dashboard that I've thrown in the repo. This exists there. It's just like sitting there as JSON. It does rely a little bit on our kind of way of doing things. So you might, if you just dunk this directly into Grafana, it might not actually show any good metrics. But you might have to do some small adjustments. For instance, let's see if I can. That's not a good one. Let's just look at this guy here. This job label, for instance, is something we use very commonly at Grafana that you might not have in your infrastructure. So you might have to make some adjustments here. We have a kind of rewrite, Prometheus scrape config rewrite, label rewrite rule that does that. These bad words also come from Promtail. So if you guys use Loki, then you have Promtail metrics and you probably have this. If you don't, then you won't have that either. So little things like that will be weird. But I kind of talk through this. This is the dashboard I look at all the time. I think some people say it's an anti-pattern or bad to look at dashboards regularly and only you should use alerts, but I look at dashboards all the time. Every morning I look, I want to see what changed. If we do a release, I watch, I want to see what changed. It's how I kind of learn what impact things are having. It's how I learn what my application is doing and really get a feel for it. I don't like to look at things only when they're breaking because then you don't know what normal looks like. And then, so I, every morning, bring this up and kind of just review what things have looked like for the past 24 hours, get a feel for where things are. And if everything looks the same, then I move on. If something weird happened, then I go dig into logs. I want to know why, and I want to understand and improve tempo. So our block list is currently around 400 blocks. And block list is really going to impact query latency due to the due to the Bloom sharding change from Ananya. Our latencies are actually pretty dang good. P50 of 400 milliseconds. I'm very happy with that right now, but we can do better. Also, once we add exhaustive searching, this will skyrocket unless we do the query front end, unless we do the parallelization. So this 400 milliseconds P50, it looks like about 2 seconds P99, is looking through the blocks, and as soon as it finds any match, it's going to bring that back and give it to the user. Like I said, we would like to improve it to search everything basically exhaustively. We're at 150,000 spans a second right now, which is a little down from our peak. I think about 170 sustained is the most we've seen, and we've seen spikes up to 200,000 to 300,000. Loki in particular makes the dumbest traces ever. Sometimes it goes 300 to 400,000 spans per trace. We actually have a limit of 250,000 spans max in our environment to prevent Loki from just basically breaking Tempo. Tempo does struggle to return traces somewhere north of 100,000 spans. I have some suspicion of where that is, but haven't had a lot of time to dig into it. But it kind of has to do a number of translations once it pulls it from disk and recombinations, and I think it's kind of just taking too long, basically, in those areas. So we need to kind of improve that. And it looks like I've noticed something is the ratio of traces to spans is very different for different companies. I'd say Tempo is mainly span limited. Spans, when I think of load, I often think of spans per second with Tempo, and I think that's the primary the limiter in terms of like scaling it. But the ratio is always very different. I think traces is also important, but less important. For instance, we're doing about, this is actually post replication factor. So we're actually at about, I think, 900 traces per second at 150,000 spans per second. If you have smaller traces, then you can do far more traces per second, and you'll just keep it, under the, and it'll be, and the spans per second will matter more, frankly. Again, it's mainly Loki, and also, it's actually mainly Loki that causes these enormous traces. It's good, right? It's good that we're testing it in an environment with very large traces and other kind of challenges so that we can make sure it works, at the scale other people need. This failed flush metric is wrong. I need to fix this. There's some kind of race condition in cleaning up the block on disk before it pushes it out to S3. So there's a issue already to fix this, but I've been ignoring this for a while. I don't want to ignore this because a failed flush is dangerous. It means some data did not make it to your backend for some reason. The ingester will retry repeatedly, but it also means you might be, backing up data on your disk. So this needs to be fixed. If I have not attached a v1 tag to it, I need to attach a v1 tag to it because this metric needs to be trustable, and it's not at the moment. I don't know. Does anybody have any questions about this or anything in particular they want me to, or Ananya to talk about regarding metrics or our scale or kind of how we're handling this?
Can also talk about Vulture a little bit.
The Vulture. So, sure.
Brooklyn Nine-Nine reference.
Right. The Vulture. So Loki made a tool called the Canary, and it makes sense. Like if you've heard of like a canary in a coal mine, right? You drop the canary down to see if there's noxious gases. I think this is forever ago. I don't think they continue to drop small birds down into mines to make sure that there's not gases that will kill humans. I hope not, at least. But they used to do this to see if the animal passed out, and they know, and it was a signal that something was wrong, basically. So the Loki Canary is a way that Loki uses to test Loki constantly to see if something happened. It's like a constant end-to-end test in production. And the Vulture, there kind of became this joke at Grafana of naming these consistent checking tools, these end-to-end integration tools after birds. So for Tempo, we're the Vulture. I don't know why, we just are. So this tool just constantly queries Tempo internally. And then we metric traces not found, how often we asked for an ID and we didn't actually find it, and how often we asked for an ID and then we search the span tree and we see if there's any missing spans. So we see if there's any reference to a span that doesn't actually exist in the trace. And so that's what these percentages are. This is actually a little elevated at the moment, 4%. We normally see less than that, and it's due to some rate limiting we've been seeing in our ops environment. So actually, somebody was just commenting on the ticket. I think it was Caesar, and I don't mean to call you out, but somebody was just commenting on a rate limiting ticket, right? And we're seeing that same issue. So that rate limiting ticket that you are looking at, we're seeing some of that internally, and that's why some of these have slightly elevated missing spans. In fact, cool. Sorry, if you look at this is our refused. So these are the spans we're dropping right now, and those are, as far as I can tell, due to this like spikiness problem. Basically, we're rate limiting over every second. And for whatever reason, traces seem to be very spiky compared to other workloads. And so even though we are below, internally, our total spans per second rate limit is, I think, 250,000 spans, or maybe it's 200,000. I'd have to go check. But we're well below that, but we're still throwing away spans due to it. And so I need to spend some time looking at that. And I think the answer is going to be, instead of every second, or enforcing rate limit by the second, let's see if we can find a way to enforce rate limit smoothed out over maybe 5 to 10 seconds. And I think this issue will go away.
You mean like a budget burn?
Yeah, I think budget burns are normally like, well, I guess I think of budget burns in terms of SLO and such. It's more like, instead of how many spans do we get in this last second, should I refuse this or not? How many spans I get in the last 10 seconds, should I refuse this or not?
Sure.
Hey Joe, I have a question on that because, yeah, as I said in the issue, like if I increase the bucket, I have those tokens to use, and then the rate will fill up until that bucket. So it will account for the bursts. So like when I changed the configuration, I was able to handle those spikes. So I don't know exactly how different it is. I understand your overall explanation, but I don't know how, if it is different, your approach or mine just increasing the bucket, because increasing the bucket actually solves the burst, and the rate will just recycle the tokens again, so I can keep going with the rate.
Okay. What we were seeing, so what I'm seeing internally is our current spans per batch is 1,000. And I'm seeing these being rejected with batch sizes of like 300 or 400, which is why my guess was it was more about spikiness versus like the size per batch that was being sent. I don't know. Maybe I should increase that burst size, that batch size, and see if that alleviates our issue. I should try that internally. I do associate that burst value with the batch size, and then the rates per second with just, well, the spans per second. So I think that's right, but I also haven't played around with it, and you have spent some time experimenting, so I should do that internally.
Yeah, there is another metric for sure for spans within a trace. Like it might be something related with that, but yeah, you should try and see if it works.
Okay. I always make notes of everything in my. I don't know how y'all organize yourself. I just have a giant text file on my desktop that I always add everything I want to do, and I delete it from there when I get done. So 1 second here.
Well, meanwhile, we have.
Thank you. Sorry.
We have more people on the call. We have Marty. We have Kamal. You want to introduce? Or say hi.
Sure. Hello. Hi. My name is Marty DeSibio. I just joined the Tempo team a couple of weeks ago, so I have already interacted with a few of you, maybe on some pull requests and things like that. So yeah, I hope to work with everyone more in the future.
Thanks,
Cool.
Marty.
Yeah.
And hey, my name is Kemal. I'm working for Red Hat, and we are building an observability platform. And yeah, since the topic is related to observability tracing, so I just want to check it out.
Very cool.
Nice.
Marty is hopefully going to spend some time working on some of our compaction. I wouldn't say issues, but certainly compaction is a bottleneck that comes up. At scale, the things that I expect to break next are compaction, the rate at which we make a lot of blocks into less blocks, and Marty has some good ideas on how to improve that. And then secondarily, it's going to be the just total length of this block list. But I think the query front end will solve that. Once those two things are in place, that's kind of why we want to stamp that with V1. Right now, we're searching, about a little bit over 1 billion traces and getting decent times. We want to search those exhaustively And then with the query front end and this compaction fix, I don't know. I'd hope to push well over 1 billion, basically. I hope it becomes a question of just, and I think this will be true, how much resources do you want to put at it? You'll be able to scale with your queries as far out as you want. You'll be able to shard, these queries as much as you want. And then, you can say 2 billion, 10 billion, whatever works. Whatever you need, I guess.
Yeah, I'm not sure if we have maybe like placeholders for what kind of compaction work we want to do in V1, but I mean, I think we want to do some things, right?
For sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're right. We probably haven't. Yeah. So a lot of tempo was just in my head for many, many months. And so I tried to write a lot of tickets, and I think I've done an okay job, but I'll admit there are some that have not made it into issues. Some of the compaction improvements have not. I've kind of just brain dumped those on poor Marty in his first week of working at Grafana. But I hope to, I've seen that community's made a number of issues, which is awesome. And I hope to start writing better issues and more issues instead of just, having personal knowledge of some of this, which is unfair to the community and to the other people who are using and working on this tool for sure.
Before we leave the subject, may I ask, we're talking about dropping traces here because of rate limiting. Is there any other currently or planned feature that tempo drops other kind of traces or basically spans, maybe orphan spans or things like that? What would happen currently and in the future?
Well, currently,
do you want to stop sharing before we go?
Oh yeah, good call. Thanks, bud.
Cool.
It currently does drop spans, right? So it doesn't. It'll receive like a batch, basically, from either the Grafana agent or the OpenTelemetry collector or whatever else you use to push spans to tempo. It will then, if it fails rate limiting, it'll refuse that entire batch. It'll send an error back over gRPC or HTTP or whatever connection was made. And then the sender will have to decide if they want to resend it or not based on the error type. The batch itself might contain entire traces, or it might contain, a bunch of different ones. It's just impossible to tell. Or, I mean, it's not impossible to tell. We could do some, we could write code that tries to determine what percentage of which traces it failed or something. But right now it just refuses an entire batch at once, essentially. Which does make for broken traces, which sucks. Also, and this will be per user, something you will think about when you all are building your trace pipelines. And those of you who have built this have probably also have already struggled with this. The larger and more, the more data you're pushing, the less likely you want to retry. At some point, you just don't retry. You just drop everything as soon as it fails, and you load shed instantly if you're having problems, because it's so much data that there's any amount of retrying just immediately starts, consuming too much memory. You start ooming if you're using something like Kubernetes. You start ooming your process, your pipeline, and you start dropping spans that way anyway. So internally, we don't retry anything because we're pushing just too much volume. When we used to have retry set up, as soon as tempo stuttered, like a bunch of the agents and collectors would instantly start using too much memory. Kubernetes would kill them, and they'd restart, and they'd drop spans anyway, so it didn't matter. So if you have a very slow pipeline and you don't have a lot coming through, then sure, a retry makes sense then, and you can just buffer all that in memory until your backend comes back up. So that's something we've kind of played with a little bit internally.
Another thing, I guess, is like we have folks from the docs team as well. We have Jita. So is there any area in the docs that the community would like more work on? Is there like better integration guides needed? Any particular section of the docs that felt was not up to the mark, or any feedback on the docs section?
I think for us, so I can take a minute to kind of explain our setup. So when we initially were looking at tempo, we saw the architecture and it made a lot of sense. And then our initial thought was that, oh, we can just split these components up. And then we figured we can deploy the ingester and the distributor in one cluster, sort of as the source for spans. And then we'll deploy a central compactor and the other parts to receive all the spans in different clusters. And then we asked some questions in the Slack channel, and then I don't think it was intended to kind of split those up. So unless there is like a working example of that, maybe that could be clearer in the documentation. And then in the future on how to do that, how to go into that direction, because we have to worry a lot about egress. So whenever we leave a zone or a region, we pay for egress in GCP at least. I don't know. It's probably the same for AWS and Azure. So that was something that we kind of stumbled on, at least.
Okay, so just to clarify that, like we'll work on fixing the docs. Thank you for that feedback. So I think to clarify that, what we would do is run agents on each of the individual clusters, and all of these components would be on one central cluster. Like the agent could be the Grafana agent or the OpenTelemetry collector if you already have it deployed. And then all of these components, tempo components, would be like in the same cluster. So thank you. We will make a note of that.
Yeah. FYI, we're deploying the Grafana agent now instead in the clusters. Oh,
perfect.
Very cool. I actually recall that conversation, and what you're suggesting or trying would technically work, but you would, as long as the data was only in the ingester layer, you would not be able to retrieve that trace. And I think we talked about that a bit in Slack. So for everyone else, you could split everything up, but the querier would not be able to contact the ingesters. You would not have access to those traces until they got flushed to the backend.
Also, FYI, we now have something on community Grafana.com, and that's more permanent for Tempo, and that's more permanent than Slack. We also have a users mailing list, but I suspect that this won't survive. That we now have community Grafana.com / blah blah Grafana Tempo, because that is probably how most people these days interact with user type questions, not email lists anymore. So that is a place where it probably makes sense to hang out.
Cool. Let's also have a poll while we're at it. How many of us have tried out exemplars?
If you're out of Grafana and you tried exemplars, I'll be impressed.
Yeah, I was about to say Grafana employees are not allowed to raise their hands, I think.
It's not even in Prometheus Master yet. It's close.
Yeah,
it's close.
Getting there.
It's
getting there.
Yeah.
Prometheus, Cortex, and Thanos are gaining this stat. I mean, in theory, yeah. And I mean, you can also emit it already, at least with Python, and I think with the Go client library also.
Cool.
So that's 0 people who tried exemplars. So let me whet your appetite with a story about the history of the exemplar. In the context of OpenMetrics, that was middle of 2016 when Google invited us to London to talk OpenMetrics at Open Census. And long story short, I tried to convince them that yes, label sets are the best thing ever for traces, and they disagreed and told me, well, searching doesn't scale. And I was like, what? Because when Google tells you that searching for something doesn't scale, you better listen. So yeah, roughly 20 milliseconds after OpenMetrics gained exemplar support. But the important part of this is that with, at that point, 18 years of operational experience of Google, they simply gave up on anything non-exemplar. So while I don't believe that everyone needs to copy the hyperscalers in how they operate, as a matter of fact, I think people shouldn't, at least for efficient underlying design, it's probably a good idea to follow their lead. And this is basically where they are leading, or what they have been using for ages now. And if that doesn't motivate you to go all in on exemplars, I don't know what will.
I really want to see how they impact us. Like, people love searching for traces and logs. It's been so effective and so powerful. I would be surprised if exemplars completely take over, but it's one of those things you really have to get a feel for and start using to see how it impacts the way you triage your issues and what, I don't know, in the moment you just use what works, right? And if I'm in the moment clicking exemplars, then that's what I'm going to use. And if I'm in the moment running these low-key queries to extract trace IDs, then that would work too. So I am also, as somebody who's played around with them some, still not sure how they're going to land and how I like triage and operate our environments, but I am excited to try them and see what happens.
So I think once you have them and once you're used to them, the thing which will naturally happen is you can extract alerts and anomalies and such a lot easier from metrics and from logs, or from logs turned into metrics, because it gives you a more holistic view of your whole system. So you jump into that one trace with a lot more context than you would be doing if you just more or less randomly clicked around it, which is not completely true, of course, but like from that perspective, you already come into that specific trace or span with the context of what was roughly wrong with that thing, which just gives you more mental tools to understand what was actually happening and what you're looking for.
Cool. Yeah, definitely.
So I have a topic I want to hear some thoughts about, and a bit tied to the architecture, because I think I heard the mention of open telemetry collector, and maybe not, but either way. Also in Slack, we discussed sampling, and I know that you're doing 100% sampling, which seems like an easy thing to do, but you might not always want to do that for several reasons. So I'm a bit curious about tail-based sampling and other kind of sampling strategies.
Sure. So when I say we're doing 100% sampling, we are controlling all that through Jaeger remote sampling. I would never just put like const 1 on my processes, because you have no control and you're going to get overwhelmed. That's going to be awful. So if you are getting into this, 100% get your team using remote sampling. What this does is lets you control from a central point how much of all of your endpoints you're sampling, and it'll let you do per endpoint control. So we sample 100% of our query path and some very low percentage of our write path, because our write path is uninteresting. It always works, basically. And our query path is where we're often having problems with latency and issues that we want to use tracing to diagnose. So remote sampling, number 1. 2, for tail-based sampling, we will intend to jump on with OpenTelemetry. So JP from Red Hat, who is also a Jaeger maintainer, has been working on a tail-based implementation in the collector. So he's looking at a way to basically, it's going to be a way to load balance by trace ID to a set of collectors. And the collector actually already has tail-based sampling in it, but you can only run one, because it basically expects all of the spans for the trace to be right there available. So his addition is going to be a way to load balance by trace ID. And then once you load balance by trace ID, you'll have a collector that should, guarantee, that doesn't really make sense in this world, but should roughly most of the time have all of your spans, at which point you can make that tail-based decision based on like an error tag or latency, or, I suppose whatever makes sense for you.
Yeah, that sounds good. Generally, I think our biggest concern right now has been that if you we're using Kubernetes and Istio, and Istio can be configured to send traces for basically everything that's happening inside your network, and that will be a lot of traces. So we need some kind of way to distinguish those traces. And I imagine in the future also some kind of real tail-based sampling as well, because not everything is interesting, as you're saying.
Yep. So I think our goal internally will always be 100% of our read path. but for our right path is where we're going to want to implement tail-based sampling or something like that. And then we'd only keep maybe ones that errored or something. I mean, so few percentage of our writes fail that it would be very few traces, but that's where we kind of experiment with that functionality at Grafana. Also, the agent, if you've looked closely, is built on top of the collector. So once tail-based sampling is in the collector, we will, make sure it is supported in the agent as well.
I actually worked on a version of tail-based sampling like about a year ago, and I'm gonna link that in this chat. Yep, that's the blog. And well, it didn't make it upstream because the community had some concerns about the number of folks using it and if it's battle tested and so on. But yeah, JP from Red Hat is now working on like a much better version of this, which will make it another contributor.
Say that. It's a different take, it's a different approach, and it will work fine. But Ananya's, I wouldn't say his was much better than Ananya's. It's not fair. Ananya just we had other work to do internally, basically, and he didn't have time to finish the job, basically. That's what it came down to.
And so yeah, tail-based sampling is definitely interesting.
Mm-hmm. Cool. Well, if we're done, if we have nothing left, Richie, do you have some stuff you want to wrap up with? Like, for instance, whatever the rules of your little token game are, how we're going to distribute this thing? Did you track everyone who asked a question, Richie?
I did actually mentally track this, and I'm pretty certain I got it right. On the other hand, I kind of feel bad calling out the only two people who didn't really ask anything. So does anyone object that I just run a random number and assign numbers to each non-Grafana Labs person and then figure out what you're actually getting shipped? Okay, so let me take a quick count. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Is this right? No, wait, that's weird. No, I didn't count the Grafana Labs people. Stupid me. Okay, just to make sure again. 1, 2, 3, 4, 6. So now it's okay. So turns out Google allows you to just search for random number 1 to 8, and that gives you a result. So number 8.
How many coins do we have, Richie?
I have one. I literally have one single coin, and my printer is supposed to be shipped tomorrow. Of course, I had to give back the other printer which I loaned, but this will be my own, and I will have it forever. But if this is now in somewhere around the world, I will probably try and either get someone printing this locally or just order stickers online and send them to whoever. And just for the record, you would be having stickers before Joe and Emily. So, number 5. Came on. Congratulations.
All right, nice surprise.
If you give me your shipping address, I can figure this out.
I don't know about that. Richie's pretty sketchy.
Yeah. So I think there's a reason why Joe would never give me his address, but
I will send that over Slack.
Very cool.
Oh, good. So anything else? Anything you liked, disliked, anything you would like to see as a feature, as a different thing to this call, or what have you? We still have a few minutes and nowhere to go. So 4 minutes, have it.
I want to ask about the coin. Is that metal?
No, that was 3D printed.
Oh, okay.
And I can, anyone who has access to a 3D printer or to a person who has a 3D printer. Let me share something.
I have one now.
Cool.
The reason I ask is I thought it was metal because I've worked with 3D printing in metal previously. So I was just curious.
Oh, I didn't put this
Why
on.
did you leave, Joachim? Why did you leave?
It's still very early R&D for 3D printing in metal.
Depends on how. Like if you're talking, but we should probably stop the recording before we go in depth on that one.
Yeah, we have
So
one person who
this
has
here is
introduced.
the repository where I will be uploading the tempo coin. Of course, I didn't upload it because it was still secret, but now it's not secret anymore, so I can put up the STL for that.
Nice.
Before we wrap up, Jeremy, do you want to say hi?
Sure. Hey guys, thanks for putting this on. I'm not familiar with Tempo really, and I've only done some research into tracing Jaeger and Zipkin, and so this is pretty new territory for me. But I have worked with Grafana for quite a while and developed a couple plugins. Rich has actually helped out on one of the plugins several years ago. I appreciate that. First time I've seen you in person, so that's cool. Zoom. Thanks for having us, though, guys. Appreciate it.
Sure. Thank you all, everyone who showed up and has been interested in Tempo, talking in Slack, making issues, making PRs. We really appreciate it. It's been a fun ride so far. Let's all stick around. Let's get V1 out, and then we're going to talk about what Tempo is for V2. That'll be the next steps for this community. So I'm excited to get there for sure. Cool. All right, everyone else.
Awesome. Thanks.
Thanks.
Everyone take care.
Take care.
Bye.
See ya.
Bye.